Barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Welcome everybody. Hope everyone's doing well, inshallah. Welcome to our weekly Wednesday women's study circle that we would host at Roots in person, and we took it online, alhamdulillah, for some of the sisters in our community who asked for a daytime study circle. Alhamdulillah, we've been doing this now for a couple years, and we've gone through many texts. We are currently just beginning and just starting one of like the most probably foundational texts and collections in our tradition, in our Islamic studies tradition. That is the 40 Hadith of Imam al-Nawawi, the Arba'in, his collection of 40 Hadith. It's actually more, but he put together a collection of 40 Hadith that are like very foundational in the development of someone's faith. And so last week, Ustadha Fatima, she covered the first hadith from this collection. And today I'll be doing the second hadith from this collection, which is a hadith that is narrated by Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an. And this hadith is very famously known as Hadith Jibreel. And we'll see why it's called that. So I'll read the hadith, I'll translate it just because it's long. We don't have a lot of time. And then we'll go through some of the lessons today from this hadith. So the hadith is stated that Umar has said that, so Umar bin Khattab is speaking here. And he said, while we were sitting with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, one day a man came up to us. So the scene is set basically that the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with his companions, and he said that one day, they were sitting together, all of them, the companions were sitting, and this man came up to them. Now, when he says this, he gives an indication that he doesn't know who this person is. So he says, this man came up to us whose clothes were extremely white. So he's describing now what he's wearing. And he said, whose hair was extremely black. That he had very, very clean white clothes, and that his hair was very well kept, and it was extremely black. And then he says, and there were no athar, there were no traces or residue of traveling that could be seen on this person. So I'm looking at him, Umar is narrating this, and he's saying, I'm looking at this person, and I notice that he's dressed very, he's wearing very nice clothes, his hair is very nice. And we're noticing him, and he doesn't look like he's been traveling, but at the same time, he said that but none of us knew who he was. None of us knew who this person was. And so he's basically, Umar is narrating this, and he's saying that this is like a enigma. This is like a weird conundrum. Like it's a situation that's coming across very strange. There's a person who shows up, he looks very proper, he looks very formal. None of us know who he is, but at the same time, he doesn't look like he's been traveling. And, Medina, and especially when it came to the greater companions, the Kibar Sahaba and others, they would know people in Medina. It was known who people were. And he's describing him in a way which is basically saying, like, if this person had been in Medina before, we would have known it. So there's something very strange already about this encounter now. So he comes up to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he said he walked straight up through our gathering to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that he sat so close to the Prophet ﷺ that his knees were basically touching the Prophet ﷺ's knees. The narration says that his knees were upon his knees, but this is an expression that would be used to say like how close they were, right? So he sat right in front of the Prophet ﷺ, this person, and he walked right up to the Prophet ﷺ, and he sat down and he bent his knees, and the Prophet ﷺ's knees and his knees were touching. So now this is like shocking to everybody because a few reasons. Like we said before, no one knows who this person is. Number two, he doesn't look like he's a traveler, but he also, no one knows who he is, but he doesn't have any signs of traveling on him. Number three is that he goes straight up to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which again, not everybody knew who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was. When they would come visit Medina, not everyone knew exactly who he was. They would oftentimes ask, which one of you is Muhammad? And then he walks up to the Prophet ﷺ and sits so close to him, as if they've known each other before. So you can see there's the strangeness of this encounter is growing, and it's catching the attention. In one of the narration, or in one of the commentaries on this hadith, the scholar writes and says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He facilitated this entire situation in this way to show those companions who were sitting there that this is a really, really serious moment, that this is something that everyone needs to pay attention to. So he goes right up to the Prophet ﷺ, he sits knee to knee, and he says to him, O Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Muhammad, which again is not a way that anybody spoke to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's coming off across that they know each other. He says, tell me about Islam. Tell me about what is Islam. Teach me what is Islam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded, and he said, Islam is that you bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. He said, and you pray, you establish your prayer, you give your zakat, you fast Ramadan, and you perform Hajj if you're able to. So the person asked, what is Islam? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him what we know as the 5 pillars. So that Shahada, Salah, Zakat, Siyam, and Hajj, those 5 pillars. Now, what's interesting, what happens next? The person who asked the question, this man that everybody is confused, who is this person? Why is he sitting so close to the Prophet ﷺ? Where did he come from? He responds with a statement that absolutely shocks everybody. He says, you have told the truth. He tells the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you have told the truth. You are correct. Umar then says, when he's narrating this, Umar says, we were shocked that the person who is asking the question has the audacity to then tell the answerer, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to tell him that you're correct. Like Umar said, we were shocked. How is this the case? It's like if you ask somebody for directions somewhere, they give you directions and you say, you know what, you're right. You're like, wait, why did you ask in the first place? So he then said to him, tell me about Iman. So first one was about Islam, and he said, tell me about Iman. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Iman is that you believe in Allah, that you believe in Allah and His angels and His books and His messengers and the last day, and you believe in qadr, destiny or decree, the good of it and the bad of it. So the first question about Islam, we got the 5 pillars. The second question about Iman, we receive what is commonly known as the 6 pillars of Iman. So this is known as the 6 pillars of Iman. So Islam has 5 pillars. Iman has 6 pillars. Iman has 6 pillars. At the end of this, when the Prophet ﷺ told him this, he said, you have told the truth again. Then the third question, he said, tell me about Ihsan. Teach me what is Ihsan. So now we have 3 different questions. Islam, Iman, Ihsan. The Prophet ﷺ says that you worship Allah. Ihsan is that you worship Allah as if you can see Him. You worship Him as if you can see Him. But he says, and even though you can't see Him, you know that He sees you. Even though you cannot see Him, you know that He sees you. Then this man said, tell me about the hour. Tell me about the hour. Give me some information about this last hour, this final hour, this day of judgment reference. The Prophet ﷺ said that the one who is asked, the one who you're asking, doesn't know more than the one who is asking. The one you're asking doesn't know more than the one who is asking. So you and I, we both, I don't know more than you about it, right? There are some things that we don't know, and we're going to talk about that, inshallah. Okay, so he says that you and I, we both don't know about the day of judgment in that way, okay? And then he said, give me some of its signs. So this man says, okay, you don't know about the day of judgment, but tell me some of its signs. The Prophet ﷺ said that the female servant will give birth to her mistress, to her master. You will see poor, naked people, barefoot people who are taking care of sheep and goats. They will be competing and making tall buildings. Then he went away. Then this man left. Okay, so this is like a really interesting scenario. The man left. Some of the companions left. And Umar radiallahu anh, he kind of stuck around. He stuck around primarily also because this was such a unique experience. Perhaps he wanted some further explanation. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Umar, do you know who that person was? And Umar said, Allah and His Messenger know best. And he said, Huwa Jibreel, atakum liyu'allimakum dinakum. That was Jibreel. He came to you to teach you your religion. Okay, so this hadith now, everyone knows why it's called Hadith Jibreel, because at the end of it, the Prophet ﷺ reveals to Umar and reveals to us by virtue of this hadith that this person that came and asked all these questions and that gave us all of these, moments, this was Jibreel. This was in fact the Archangel Gabriel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent to this gathering to teach the companions, and by virtue of teaching them, teaching us of our religion. So what are some of the things that we learned from this hadith regarding, there's a lot of points, by the way. There's a lot of points. People have written, books and books and books, pages and pages upon pages about this hadith. But the few things that I want to focus on here as we go through it are the different categories of faith that Jibreel taught us about. So the first one he mentioned was Islam. And when you look at Islam, you see one thing that's interesting is that this commentator, his name is Ibn Rajab, he's a scholar from our tradition, and he wrote a commentary on the 40 hadith. He said that when we look at Islam, we find that all of the actions that the Prophet ﷺ used to define Islam were actions that were like outward physical expressions of faith, that they were the outward physical stuff. So when he said, teach me about Islam, the Prophet ﷺ didn't talk about feeling something in your heart. He didn't talk about, feeling repentance during Tawbah. He didn't talk about the inner. He talked about only the outer. He said what? It's to take the shahada, right? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. That I bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship but Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His messenger and servant. To proclaim the shahada, that's a physical action, okay? To pray, which is another physical action. To fast, give zakat, and perform hajj. All of these are physical actions. And what the scholars say about this particular category of actions is that these actions don't necessarily give a person internal confirmation. They are only physical. Meaning what? You can look into a gathering of people and everybody could be performing prayer together, but not everyone's prayer in that gathering is equal. Not everyone's faith in that gathering is equal. That you could look at a given, a picture of or a video of a masjid, and you could see everybody there praying, but not everyone who's there praying, they have equal faith, but they're all doing the same physical action. So we learn something very important, which is that even though Islam has a pronounced importance on physical action, that physical action is the beginning of one's faith. It's not the end of one's faith. The physical action, submission, is the beginning, is the entrance of one's faith. It's not the conclusion. It's not the ceiling of one's faith, right? And so the actions that we are taught in those 5 pillars, these are things that will enter us into the category of being a Muslim. Somebody who acts upon Islam is somebody who's called a Muslim. What does all of this mean? What this means is that not every person's faith is the same. There is, in fact, a hierarchy in faith. Now, we can't detect that hierarchy by looking at somebody. So I can't look at you and tell you whether or not you're level 10 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 or 5, and you can't do the same for me. You can't look at me and assume that I am this or that, for better or for worse. All of that is hidden. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hidden those things from each other because Lord knows if we knew accurately what was internally the state of faith of a person, it would be impossible to be a community. It would be impossible to be with people. There would be a lot of judgment and hatred. So these things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hidden from us. But the one thing that He made manifest, outward, that we have to do are these actions that enter us into this faith of Islam. So everybody who is a Muslim has to believe and has to do their best to pray. But that doesn't mean that everybody who prays is the same kind of person, right? So in Islam, we do in fact believe in a hierarchy. Now that hierarchy is differentiated based on the internal, which we don't know. But we do believe that you can grow in your faith. But the beginning of it is Islam. Some scholars have said that Islam is the submitting part of faith, that this entry point is the submitting part. And what they mean by that, when you read further about what they mean by that, is that not everybody who is a Muslim with passion. Not everybody who's a Muslim is a Muslim with passion, right? Passion in faith is something that is not given, it's not granted. It's not just given to everybody. And this submission is a forced kind of submission. And some scholars even said it's forced based off of fear of punishment. So they said like the lowest level of faith is when somebody forces themselves to submit. And the reason why they're submitting is not because of all of the mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to offer. It's not because of all of the compassion and the love and the graciousness and the forgiveness. That's not why somebody is submitting to Allah. The lowest level of faith, some scholars have said, is that when a person submits to Allah because they are afraid of punishment. One of my teachers, he said that it's similar to somebody who has a job only because they don't want to get evicted from their apartment. If you ask somebody like, why do you work here? A person could give you many different kinds of answers. They could be passionate about the work. They could love the pay and the benefits. The least, I guess, bought in employee in an organization is somebody who was like, I just needed a job, right? I just need a job. Now that doesn't mean that person's doesn't get paid. They get paid just like everybody else, right? They get paid. So the Muslim who worships Allah out of fear of punishment is not like Allah Ta'ala says, that he doesn't disregard their reward. That these people aren't just like, oh, well, you're praying and you're only praying out of fear. Like, well, you're not going to get all the ajr then. No, that's not how it works. But what is the consequence of living a life of entry-level faith is that, well, we'll talk about it more, but there are consequences to living in this area. It's an entry point, but you don't want to stay here. You don't want to stay in a place of submission out of fear of consequence. The second level then that Jibreel alayhi salam gives is Iman. And Iman is another level, and we find in the Quran that, well, the Prophet ﷺ, he answers the question differently. So that's the first indication that we have that Iman and Islam are different things, right? Because he answers the question differently. Had he said the same thing twice, then we would say, okay, Iman and Islam are the same thing. But they're actually different things. So Islam, we're going to translate as submission or as faith through submission. Iman, we're going to translate as willing faith. Faith that is willing, that a person is doing willingly, right? And the Quran actually deals with this. The Quran actually talks about this distinction and gives us those things. And the Prophet ﷺ, in his definition to Jibreel, they are all things that are hidden. So he says belief in Allah, belief in the angels, belief in the books, belief in the messengers, belief in the last day, and belief in destiny. These are all things that are hidden. Even for those people who are there, even though the Prophet ﷺ was not hidden to them, previous prophets were hidden to them. So prophethood as an institution was hidden. So the first level are things that are outward. The second level, scholars say, are things that are inward. And this is a challenge because being congruent, outward and inward, is like a very, very, very difficult thing. It's super easy to fake it. It's very easy for a person to appear something and not actually to do something. It's extremely easy. It's too easy. It's like dangerously easy. And so Iman actually is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he actually addresses. And he says that not everybody who is Muslim is a mu'min. Probably the most famous example of this, that we can see this very direct distinction in Surah Al-Hujurat, which is chapter number 49, is when Allah Ta'ala says that there were a group of Bedouins who had accepted Islam. And when they accepted Islam, they pronounced that they had actually become mu'minun, that they had said, we are mu'minun. قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. That they pronounce, we have faith, we have willing faith. Okay, not submission, we have willing faith. And Allah Ta'ala responded to them. He said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا. Say, you don't have iman quite yet. وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا. Rather, you should say, because you're at this very introductory stage, أَسْلَمْنَا. We have submitted. We have submitted. We have entered into the faith. وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. And Allah Ta'ala clarifies, and He's saying that because iman has not quite entered your heart yet. So here we have like a very definite, clear, this is not ambiguous, this is very clear, that there are different levels of faith. That a person who has just entered Islam, they maybe, right, it's not talking about lack of sincerity, by the way. They're submitting, but iman has different experiences. To graduate to that level, there's a different experience. It's like somebody who, it's like somebody who's in a different level of school. It's not their fault, right? They've entered, and there's no holding them back if they overachieve. If they do the work, they can skip grades, they can do all these things. But the reality is that there are steps that are taken in a person's development of faith. وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ لَا يَلِتْكُم مِّنْ أَعْمَالِكُم شَيْئًا. That Allah Ta'ala continues and says, if you obey Allah and His Messenger, don't worry. Just because you are not yet from the mu'minun or mu'minin, and you're from the Muslimun, doesn't mean that your deeds aren't worth anything. No, your deeds are still accepted. But the experience of faith is very different for a person who is submitting out of fear or submitting out of introductory submission versus a person who has graduated to the willing faith category. The experiences are very different. Okay? And so iman, going back to the example my teacher gave, so if you go back to the employee who is only working so they don't get evicted from their apartment, the second stage is the employee or the staff who they work and they like the job, but they're not like passionate per se about, they like the pay, they like the benefits, all of that. They like their team, but they're not necessarily like truly passionate about the mission of the company, right? So they love all the benefits, they love the work style, they love the team environment, the culture of the company, right? But they're not like ultra passionate about the actual business itself, right? That they just have this sort of like willingness to be there, but they're not ultra passionate, okay? So then Jibreel alayhi salam, and he mentions, by the way, this commentator, Ibn Rajab, he mentions, some of the things that people feel as a result of their iman. He actually goes through a list. He says, how do you know that you've graduated from Islam to iman? And he says, he gives a list of things. He says that one of the things that happens to a person is that they're, let me find the list that he says. Oh yeah, it's right here. So he says that, a person's heart begins to shake when they hear the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That their heart begins to rattle when they hear the remembrance of Allah, when they hear Quran, like they love it. He says that, a mu'min is somebody who, when they, where is it right here? Oh yeah, okay. So their hearts tremble. Number one is that they enjoy remembering Allah over forgetting Allah. That they choose to listen to Quran over music, or they choose to read the Quran over just sitting on their Instagram for a long time, or they enjoy, if they were to put on like a video of the Kaaba of like prayer happening at Masjid Haram, they would love that. Like these are things that they love. They love seeing faith. They love seeing faith. They love witnessing faith, right? Allah Ta'ala mentions that they are trusting of Allah, that the mu'min, they have this unshakable reliance and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the characteristics of the mu'min. And then you have the third category that Jibreel mentions, which is what is ihsan. And the Prophet ﷺ gives a very interesting and a very, very complex definition. He says it's as if it's for a person that worships Allah as if they can see them. And even though they can't see Him, they know that He sees them. And so the commentators say that this is a faith that is the faith of like a close friend, the faith of somebody who submits willingly. Now it's not, it began as submission and it ends as submission. But what makes a person submit is different. In the beginning, they submit because they're afraid. At the end, they submit because they want to be close to Allah. That they want to be close to Allah. It's like the person who works for the company and they don't really care about, they're not really as focused on benefits and pay and all that. They just do it because they love the mission. They love the work that the company is doing, right? And they're willing to take a pay cut, or they're willing to not make as much money that they could be making somewhere else because they love the work and the mission that this company is doing. So there are three kinds of employees, right? And I don't mean to trigger you if you find yourself falling into one of the three. But these are the three levels of faith that Jibreel alayhi salam gives us. And this is, by the way, I want everyone to understand, like, these levels, we can transcend them even throughout a single day. You can have some moments where you feel like you're just submitting out of fear. You're just waking up for Fajr because you don't want to go to hell. There's a lot of Fajrs that we pray that are Fajrs because we're just submitting because we just have to do the action, right? And there are some moments that are like mu'min actions, like it's not necessarily only about being fearful of consequences or doing this physical action, but I'm being like internally motivated through my iman, my faith, that I want to do something more, right? I'm praying early. Dhuhr just came in. It's 1:30. It's 1:45. I could technically wait for 3, 4, 5 hours. Technically, the waqt for Dhuhr is very long. But you know what? I'm gonna just stop what I'm doing and pray right now. And when I do that, I'm articulating an iman-based action. It's no longer just about submitting out of fear. Now it's actually, no, I want to do this because I know that as-salatu ala waqtiha is one of the, prayer on its time is one of the things that Allah loves the most. And heck, why wouldn't I want to go and do something that I know Allah loves, right? That would bring me closer to Him. That's an iman-based action, right? An ihsan-based action, you could have like an ihsan isha. After isha prayer, you sit there and you just sit. You lengthen your prayer and you sit and make dua. And somebody says like, hey, don't you want to come downstairs and watch the movie? Or don't you want to? And you're like, yeah, just give me a few minutes, right? I'm just really enjoying this. Or you're listening to this beautiful recitation and you just sit and stop and take it in and benefit from it. Or, you have like, it's like enjoying dessert. It's like having sweetness. Like you don't want it to end. We've all been there, subhanAllah, man. Like I get really rattled when I think of Tarawih because I missed it this year so much. Miss praying with the masjid, I mean. And I remember like there are certain imams, there are certain people who lead salah that like when they go into ruku, like you get mad. You know what I mean? Like their voice is so beautiful and their recitation is so powerful and it's so substantive that when you hear them do like that last stretch, when they're Wallahu alimun hakim, they do that and you know that they're ending the rak'ah, you're like, no, please, like please keep going because I'm just loving every minute of this. I'm loving every moment. That's ihsan. That's when there's just beauty that's being articulated from that moment. And so a person can have very realistically, absolutely, can have those three different experiences in the same day. What's the goal? And I mentioned this in the beginning. The goal is that we have more meaningful and substantive faithful experiences than we do have unwilling and submissive ones. Unwilling and submissive it's not a bad thing. In fact, sometimes that's like very beautiful in and of itself, that, oh Allah, I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it for you. I don't want to get up right now and pray, oh Allah, but I'm doing it because I know you want me to. And I'm doing it because I don't want to displease you. Oh Allah, like I don't want to wear the hijab, but I'm doing it solely because of you, right? There are a lot of deeds that in their fight, they become beautiful, right? But you never want to live there for too long. You don't want to like constantly operate in that, because one of my teachers said something very beautiful. He said that the closer you are to the edges of faith, where it's less about a willing submission to Allah, and it's more about a forced submission. He said when Allah sends trials and tests and difficulties upon you, the closer you are to the edges of the boat, the more likely you might be to fall out, right? The more likely it might be to fall out. And so you can have, the example that I give to people is like a lot of times with spirituality is like exercise, like physical health and spiritual health have a lot of parallels. And if you delay your workout every day until the last thing you're going to do, if you delay it, or if you put it aside, chances are like you're going to end up skipping it, right? But there's still beauty in those days when you really don't want to go for a run. You just want to sit and eat more spaghetti. And you put on your running clothes and you put on your shoes and you go running, even if that run was horrible, even if it was slow, even if it felt like, you couldn't breathe and it was like the horrible, like your legs were aching, but you finished it. There is power and beauty in that moment. But if that happens every day, it's very, very difficult to keep that going. So my teachers they would always say, like, try to put yourself as much as possible. The way you want it is you want your old highs to become your new lows. That's the goal for Iman. That's the goal for Tazkiyah. The goal for spirituality is I want what used to be considered a high for me, that in 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, I want that high to now be something that like I average. And then eventually it's like, man, like, alhamdulillah, like that used to be something that I used to like, that used to be something that was like really good for me. And now like, if I do that, it's actually a bad day. Like I want to start reading Quran once a week. I want to sit down and read the Quran once a week. You do that for like 3 months, you do that for 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm going to start reading Quran twice a week, 3 times a week, every day. By the end of the year, you're reading it every single day, right? And you're like, man, I used to only read this once a week. That's crazy to me. You're like, I can't believe. And again, it's a natural organic growth of faith, but it's important to understand that you want to get closer and closer to that strong, willing submission. So this is what the hadith is teaching us. And then to conclude, because I know I'm already going over time by a few minutes, the rest of the hadith is actually also very interesting. And that is that he asks a very powerful question. He says, tell me about the day of judgment, or tell me when the day of judgment is. And the Prophet ﷺ actually responds by saying, I don't know. He says it in a poetic way. He says that, the asker knows just as much as the asked, which is his way of saying like, it's something that Allah Ta'ala only knows. How many of us, we feel like faith is, we almost hold faith hostage unless it can give us all the answers. And the minute that we come to Islam with a question and the answer we get back is not definitive, it's not, it doesn't solve our problem, we're like, why am I even, why do I even do this? Is this really real? And a lot of times the rejection of Islam, of faith, comes from the perception that it doesn't have answers, right? That it has to have all the answers. That expectation of faith was never given to us by faith. I don't know where that came from. Imam Ghazali actually talks about this. He says people get really frustrated with religion sometimes because he said they're so used to things like mathematics and science, which are very precise sciences. He says they're very precise. Mathematics, like there's no, unless you're me, there's no guessing the answer. In mathematics, there's an answer. It's precise. Like 1 + 1 = 2. You don't say 1 + 1 is about 2 or just under 3. No, you say 1 + 1 is 2. It's precise, right? And he says that you don't apply that same mathematical methodology of precision to spirituality and faith. And so if you come to Islam and you say, oh Allah, why is this happening? COVID-19, like why is this happening? Why are people losing their businesses and health and all these? And we get upset because we're expecting Allah to send us like an answer. Allah like send us a book, give us an answer. Let me read it and let me be satisfied with the answer. That's really what we're asking. And then you read moments like this where the Prophet ﷺ says himself, the messenger of Allah, I don't know. It's his job to deliver the message. It's his job to teach us. If it were his job to teach us, wouldn't it wouldn't it behoove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wouldn't it make sense, and I'm doing this in quotations for those of you who are listening to the audio, wouldn't it make sense that Allah give the Prophet ﷺ every answer so that the Prophet ﷺ could prove that faith can answer everything, so that people didn't have a single shred of doubt? What's the benefit of the Prophet ﷺ not being given every answer? The benefit, as some scholars say, is if the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't have every single answer to every question, every existential question that people had, then we also should not have that expectation. If the Prophet ﷺ didn't know certain things, then why do we get flustered and frustrated when things happen in the universe, things happen in our life? They're real. No one's denying them. They're very painful sometimes. People get divorced, people lose jobs, people lose family, those moments are real, they're painful. They happen to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He lost family, he lost loved ones, he went through difficulties, he went through tough financial times, he went through pain. But are those moments enough to substantiate a rejection of faith because it's not giving us the solution that we're looking for? The Prophet ﷺ went through it. And the scholars say if he went through it, then we should expect to go through it too, right? And that maybe the answer is not being given to us as like a written answer, but maybe the answer is in that experience. Maybe the strength you're gaining is your answer, right? Maybe, as the scholars say, why did the Prophet ﷺ lose everybody? Why was he born with no father and his father was not alive and his mother passed away very early? And then later on into his life, he loses his wife and his uncle. Why? And the scholars of Sirah, sometimes they say this is so that he learned a very powerful lesson from a young age of loss all the way up until he was 40, that if he truly wants to rely on something that will always be there, Allah is the only one that will always be there. Some scholars, they write this as a wisdom, right? So maybe the answer to the questions that we find to be unsolvable, maybe the answers are actually hidden in it. They're not at the end of it, but they're inside of it. So anyways, this hadith is like a beautiful framing of faith, and to try to cover it in 30 minutes is very difficult. But what I want everyone to walk away with here are two things. Number one, Islam, Iman, and Ihsan are different faith experiences. Our goal is to have more Iman and Ihsan moments in our life than we do Islam moments. Now, Islam moments are a thing. Doing something out of fear, doing something out of force, it is a thing, okay? Just like I went running last night, not because I particularly wanted to, and not because I even felt great about it, but because I don't want to die, from a heart attack and bad health. I want to keep myself healthy for my family, my kids, and I want to fit into my clothes, right? So I have a fear that motivated me yesterday to go exercise. So you do sometimes have to have those moments, but you don't want to live there. So you want to have as many Iman and Ihsan moments. How do you have those moments? You reflect more on the benefit of the action than you do the consequence of leaving the action. So how do you motivate yourself to pray in a positive way? You reflect on the benefits of prayer as opposed to the consequences of leaving. If you only think about consequences, you're going to be moved into a fearful submission mindset, which is not, again, it's necessary sometimes, but not where you want to live. If you think about the benefits of salah, what does salah do for me? It connects me to Allah. Every time I make sajda, I lose bad deeds. Every time I make sajda, I make dua, Allah is answering. He's listening to me very closely and answering me. Every time I do that, like thinking of the positive benefits of these things. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, what am I doing? It's time to pray. I got to get up and pray. You're motivated. In the same way that you work out, you hate it. And then guess what? You look in the mirror and you're like, hey, who's that? Or like you step on the scale and you're like, I didn't know numbers existed below that number, right? And you see the benefits of what you've been doing. And now all of a sudden, the next time you go running, you're like, yeah, I want to go running. I want to run longer. I want to work out. I want to do this, right? Or you've been eating healthy and you're like, it starts showing on you and you're like, yeah, I want to have broccoli over potato chips, of course, right? Like you start to enjoy that submission. And it goes from the person who doesn't want to pray but forces themselves to pray to the one who can't imagine their life without prayer. There was There was a line in here, subhanAllah, like shook me. There was a line in here of a person who said that during Salah, there was a great wali of Allah that Ibn Rajab, he quoted him in the chapter on Ihsan, and he said that he sat there. I want to read it to you. I want to get it exactly because I don't want to make a mistake. Yeah, he said, there was a man amongst us who used to pray every day until his legs became tired. He said he would pray as much as he could, and then he would sit down, and then he would pray as much as he could, and then he would lay down, and he would pray, and he would lay on his side, and he would keep praying to Allah. And one day we walked by him, and we heard him say, I am astonished that the person was saying this. He's saying, I'm shocked, oh Allah. He was talking to Allah. I'm shocked, oh Allah, at people who can be intimate with others more than they're close to you. I'm shocked. And he said, I'm amazed that people's hearts can be put at ease and at rest by remembering anything else but you. You know, it's interesting because I feel like when a person first initiates themselves into faith, there are moments where the idea of prayer, of connecting to Allah, like agitates us. May Allah protect us. It like agitates us. I gotta pray. Or we're like, I gotta pray. Let me pray real quick. Even the language we use, let me just pray real quick. And then you graduate and you climb. You work so hard and you climb all the way to this point, and you get to this point where he says like, oh Allah, you know, he says like, I just can't imagine how people find peace and happiness in anything else besides you. You know, subhanAllah. So may Allah Ta'ala give us that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that. Abu Bakr al-Muzani, he said, Abu Bakr al-Muzani, he said, oh Allah, he goes, oh mankind. He was speaking to human beings. He goes, your closest friend is only water and a prayer rug away. He said, oh Ibn Adam, oh child of Adam, he said, your closest friend, the one that's closest to you, like you think your best friend is like this away. He goes, your closest friend is just some water and a mihrab away from you, meaning wudu and pray. Like go ahead and start praying, and Allah Ta'ala will be there for you. So may Allah Ta'ala grant us that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us this level of faith where we achieve iman and ihsan, and Allah Ta'ala give us that humility to understand what we can understand and to not try to fight the things that we can't understand. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Jazakumullah khairan. I'm sorry for going over time. This hadith is I didn't even cover it, man, properly. SubhanAllah, I didn't even finish all of it. Maybe next week, inshallah, Ustad Fatima can finish it. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Jazakumullah khairan. I love you all for the sake of Allah. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. We have tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. We're continuing our reading of Imam al-Ghazali's book on prayer called Perfecting the Prayer for 30 minutes at 5 p.m. inshallah. So go ahead and mark that in your calendar. I look forward to seeing you there. Barakallahu feekum, and everyone on here, go and follow Yaz Guru, Yasmin al-Hadi, mashallah, she's legit. All right, Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Take care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.